He grabbed her wrist, not by accident, not a brush of the hand in a crowded room. He grabbed her, fingers tight, deliberate, the way a man grabs something he believes belongs to him, and he yanked her forward like she was a prop he'd ordered from a catalog. The champagne glass she was carrying hit the marble floor. Crystal exploded across the tiles, and the laughter that followed, 200 people, silk dresses and tailored suits, chandeliers catching the light off their teeth, was the kind of laughter that doesn't forget you, the kind that follows you home. Her name was Nia Brooks. She was 34 years old. She had never once in her life asked anyone for anything she hadn't earned. And in 30 seconds, a man who didn't know her name had just made her the punchline of a joke she never agreed to be part of. If that were you, standing under those lights, surrounded by strangers who were laughing, what would you have done? Before we go further, if this is your first time here, please take a moment and subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And when you finish watching, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Stories like Nia's deserve to be heard all the way around the world. Now, let's go back to that ballroom. The night started the way most difficult nights do, quietly and with very little warning. Nia Brooks had been working the Hargrove estate for 3 years. Not because she loved it, not because the pay was exceptional, though the tips on gala nights sometimes covered 2 weeks of groceries. She worked it because she was reliable, because her feet knew the layout of that kitchen without her having to think, and because Mrs. Calloway, the catering manager, trusted her to show up on time and not complain when things went sideways. Things went sideways a lot at the Hargrove estate. She pulled her uniform on in the parking structure 2 blocks away, the way she always did. The locker rooms at the service entrance were shared and cramped, and she'd learned the hard way that arriving already dressed saved her 10 minutes of standing too close to women who had a habit of making comments. Small ones, the kind that sound like nothing if you repeat them out loud, but land like something when they're delivered with a certain smile. You'd think they'd have uniforms in more sizes by now. That one had come from a woman named Patricia, who had set it to the ceiling rather than to Nia's face. So, she dressed in the parking structure. The night air was cold, and the cobblestones outside the estate were wet from an earlier rain. She kept her head down not because she was ashamed, but because the ground was uneven and she'd twisted her ankle twice in those shoes. Practical reasons. She'd learned to assign practical reasons to most things that would otherwise make her too angry to function. The ballroom was already electric when she entered through the service door at 7:45. She could feel it before she saw it. That particular hum of expensive bodies gathered in one room, the pressure of money and performance, and the unspoken agreement that everyone present was required to appear to be having the best evening of their lives. She picked up her first tray without being told. That was her way. Don't wait to be assigned. Don't make yourself visible before you're ready. Move through the edges of the room where the air is thinner and no one's looking, and just do the work. She was good at being invisible. It was a skill she had developed slowly over many years, out of necessity. When you look the way Nia looked, when you are, as her mother used to say, with unconditional love, all presence, baby, you take up all the good space in a room. Invisibility doesn't come naturally. You have to practice it. You have to learn how to make your footsteps quieter, how to hold a tray so it doesn't catch the light, how to pass through a conversation without disturbing the air. She had practiced for years. She was very, very good at it. And yet, the first time she noticed him, it was purely by accident. She was refilling a glass near the third table from the east window when she felt, not saw, felt, someone watching her. Not the casual glance that guests sometimes threw at the waitstaff. This was different, steadier. She looked up without meaning to, a small reflex she hadn't been able to train out of herself, and found a man sitting alone at a table near the back of the room. He was not the loudest person in that ballroom. He was not the most visibly powerful, though she would later understand that visible power is almost always the cheapest kind. He was just a man in a dark suit, one hand resting on the table, watching the room the way a person watches a fire, with patience and with the quiet understanding that they are in no danger from it. He looked at her for 2 seconds. Then he looked away. She didn't think about him again for almost an hour. By 9:15, the gala was in full performance. Senator someone or other had given a short speech about the importance of community investment. A woman in a sapphire dress had cried at the right moment and been photographed doing it. The Hargrove family, host Gerald Hargrove, his wife Constance, and their daughter Vivian, had worked the room with the coordinated efficiency of people who had been performing their own lives for so long they'd forgotten there was anything underneath the performance. Gerald Hargrove was 61 years old and had never, in Nia's experience, said anything directly cruel to a member of the service staff. He had a subtler approach. He liked to perform his power in ways that looked like generosity, the extended introduction that made you stand there too long, the joke told at someone else's expense wrapped in a laugh warm enough that you couldn't object without seeming humorless, the way he'd hold a conversation across you rather than around you, as though you were a piece of furniture he was politely acknowledging. She had learned to navigate Gerald Hargrove the same way she navigated all difficult geography. With her feet and her patience and the quiet understanding that she was there to do a job, and the job had a beginning and an end. The job had a beginning and an end. She kept telling herself that. She was carrying a tray of champagne flutes across the center of the room when it happened. Not Gerald. His daughter. Vivian Hargrove was 27 years old and had the kind of beauty that had been so thoroughly maintained and managed that it no longer looked entirely natural, the way certain landscapes stop looking like nature once they've been too precisely manicured. She was standing with 3 other women near the center of the room, all 4 of them performing the laughter that women in rooms like that are required to perform. And as Nia passed, Vivian reached out and took a glass from the tray without looking at her. That wasn't unusual. That was the job. What was unusual was that Vivian then turned to her friends and said, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "Do you know they're having trouble finding women to fit these uniforms? Apparently the sizes are running a little, generous this season." The laugh that followed was small, targeted, the kind that knows exactly what it's doing. Nia did not stop walking. She adjusted her grip on the tray and kept moving because she had 4 more tables to cover, and the work did not stop because someone decided to be cruel in her direction. But her hands were not entirely steady. She had a script for moments like this. She had constructed it carefully over years of practice, from pieces of advice her mother had given her and hard-won experience and the simple practical mathematics of survival. It is not about you. It is about them. You are not what they see when they look at you. You know who you are. You know who you are. You know who you are. The script worked. Most of the time it worked. She found a quiet corner near the kitchen entrance and set the tray down for a moment and pressed her fingertips against the edge of a service table and took one breath. Just one. Because that was all she allowed herself. She didn't see Gerald Hargrove walking toward her. She heard him before she saw him. The particular cadence of a man who expects a path to clear in front of him. The sound of footsteps that have never learned to be uncertain. And then his voice, carrying across the room with the ease of someone who had spent his whole life being amplified. There she is. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she'd seen before but couldn't quite classify, somewhere between amusement and appetite, the look of a man who has just thought of something entertaining that is going to cost someone else. "I need you to come with me for a moment." She should have said no. She knew that, in some quiet part of herself she didn't always have access to, but he was the client. He was the reason she was employed tonight, and saying no to a client, in front of 200 guests with 3 years of professional relationship on the line, was not a calculation she could make in the 2 seconds she had. So she said nothing, which was, in that moment, the same as yes. He led her toward the center of the room. She walked behind him, tray in her hands because she hadn't had time to set it down, and she could feel the room rearranging its attention around her approach. The conversations didn't stop, they just slowed, the way a river slows before a waterfall. He stepped up onto the small raised platform at the front of the room, the same one the senator had used for his speech, and turned to face his guests with the expression of a man who is about to be very entertaining. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "a quick interruption." He didn't take her hand to bring her up. He reached back and closed his fingers around her wrist, tight, deliberate, proprietary, and pulled. The champagne flute she was carrying hit the marble floor. Crystal exploded across the tiles. The laughter started immediately. Not from everyone, but enough. enough that it filled the room and pressed against the walls and became the sound she would hear for weeks after, lying awake at 3 in the morning, trying to locate some other memory to put in its place. "I want to introduce you," Gerald Hargrove said, his voice warm with the particular warmth of a man who is being deliberately cruel and has disguised it as humor, "to a member of our wonderful service team tonight." He said service team the way you'd say the furniture. "Now, I've been told that the theme of tonight's gala is belonging." He spread his hands. The gesture was practiced, presidential. "And I thought we should explore that idea a little, really examine it." He turned and looked at Nia with an expression that was almost curious, the way a person might look at an object they've never seen before and can't quite categorize. What does it mean to belong? Who belongs in a room like this? She stood perfectly still. This was not strategy. She wasn't calculating her response or measuring her dignity against the cost of resistance. She was simply still. The way certain animals go still, not because they are surrendering, but because movement in that moment would cost more than it could possibly return. "She thinks she belongs here," Vivian said from somewhere in the crowd, a ripple of laughter. Gerald Hargrove tilted his head. "What do you think?" he asked Nia. The question was not a question. It was an invitation for everyone else to keep laughing. "Do you think you belong here?" She was aware of several things simultaneously. She was aware of the 200 faces arranged around her like a theater in the round, most of them lit with the particular excitement of people who are watching a spectacle that isn't costing them anything. She was aware of the wet feeling at the back of her throat that meant she was closer to tears than she was willing to be. She was aware that her feet hurt. She'd been on them for 3 hours, and her left shoe had a seam that was rubbing the inside of her heel raw. She focused on her feet, on the specific concrete reality of her feet on the floor, because that was real, and this was... "Well?" Gerald Hargrove smiled. "We're all waiting." She opened her mouth. She didn't know what was going to come out. She had the vague, distant sense that whatever she said was going to matter, that this moment had the particular weight of a moment that stays with you. But she couldn't locate the words fast enough. She was still searching when Vivian appeared at the edge of the platform with a glass in her hand, still half full, deep red, and turned it. The wine hit her chest, soaked through the white uniform shirt, spread across the fabric in a dark, expanding stain, while the room made a sound that was not gasping. She had expected gasping. It was laughter, layered and immediate and confident, the laughter of people who have watched this kind of thing happen enough times to know how to respond to it. She felt the cold of the wine against her skin. And she did not move. Because if she moved, if she stepped back or grabbed at the fabric or made any of the sounds that were trying to come out of her body, she would give them the rest of it, and the rest of it was hers. The part of her that still existed outside of this moment, the part that knew who she was and where she came from and what she had survived, that was hers. And she was not going to hand it to Gerald Hargrove on that stage. So she stood still. And across the room, unnoticed by almost everyone in it, the man in the dark suit, the one who had been watching the room like a man watching a fire, slowly set down his glass. Gerald Hargrove was still talking. Something about belonging, something about standards, something that wrapped cruelty in the language of humor and expected everyone present to be grateful for the entertainment. She could hear the words without fully absorbing them, the way you hear music through a wall. She was focused on one thing. The exit was 32 feet away. She had counted. She had been counting exits in rooms since she was 19 years old, since a night she didn't talk about, and it was a habit she had never managed to break. 32 feet. Past the third table and the bar cart and the cluster of women near the window. If she walked steadily, head up, she could be through the service door in under a minute. 1 minute. She could survive 1 minute. Gerald Hargrove turned to address the room again, pivoting slightly so that his shoulder was toward her. The physical punctuation of a man who has finished with a prop. And in that gap, that small window, Nia Brooks stepped off the platform. No stumble. No hurry. Both feet on the floor. She started walking. She heard Vivian say something. She heard the murmur of the crowd shift, recalibrating. She heard Gerald Hargrove's voice, sharpened slightly, the warmth drained out. Call after her. Where are you going? She kept walking. Hey! His voice got louder. The crowd got quieter. I didn't dismiss you. 32 feet was not very far. She was almost there. She was almost... Two security guards appeared at the service door. Big men, crisp jackets. They positioned themselves shoulder to shoulder in the doorway, and they looked at her with the flat, professional expressions of people who are paid to enforce other people's decisions. She stopped. She heard Gerald Hargrove's footsteps on the marble behind her, the particular unhurried sound of a man who knows the door is blocked. I think, he said, and his voice had returned to its earlier register, warm, amused, performing for the audience that was performing for him. That we should let our guest of honor spend the rest of the evening outside, since she's in such a hurry to leave. Someone near the front laughed. The security guards began to move toward her, and from the back of the room, a chair scraped against the floor. Quietly. Slowly. The kind of sound that shouldn't carry, but did. Because when the man in the dark suit stood up, the 7 people nearest to him went completely silent in the same instant, with the involuntary animal response of people who have just registered something large and slow and patient beginning to move. That silence spread, the way silence always spreads when the wrong person has finally decided to enter the room. The silence moved through that ballroom the way cold air moves through a building when someone leaves a door open in winter. You feel it before you understand where it's coming from, before you can locate the source, and by the time you do, it's already inside you. Dante Moretti stood at his full height. He wasn't a large man in the way that Gerald Hargrove's security guards were large, that manufactured, gym-built largeness that was designed to communicate threat. Dante was tall in the way that certain structures are tall, not because they are trying to be, but because that is simply what they are. He straightened slowly, without drama, the way a person stands when they have nowhere to be in a hurry because the world will wait for them. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair with one hand and put it on, one arm, then the other. And then he buttoned the single button at the center with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Then he walked, not fast, not slow. The precise, metered pace of someone who has calculated exactly how much time it takes to cross a room and has decided to use all of it. The crowd parted. They didn't decide to part. It happened the way things happen in the presence of certain kinds of gravity. Not because anyone commanded it, but because the body understands things the mind is still catching up to. Nia heard the footsteps behind her before she saw anything change in the faces of the 2 security guards blocking the service door. She watched it happen there first, in their faces. The way their professional blankness flickered, the way something behind their eyes did the math, and arrived at an answer that made them take one small, unconscious step backward. Just one step. But it was enough. Gerald Hargrove didn't see it yet. He was still performing for the room, still wearing that smile, that warm, weaponized hospitality. And he was saying something, some continuation of whatever he'd been saying, but the room was no longer listening to him, and some part of him could feel it, the way performers always feel when the audience's attention shifts, even before they can identify where it shifted to. He turned. Dante stopped walking when there was approximately 6 feet between them. Not 10 feet. The distance of someone who wants to give the other person room to breathe. Not 2 feet. The distance of confrontation. 6 feet. The distance of a man who is comfortable enough in his own authority that he doesn't need proximity to communicate it. He looked at the security guards. He didn't speak. He just looked at them. Both men stepped back from the doorway. Gerald Hargrove watched this happen. He watched his own security personnel, men he paid, men he had hired specifically for their size and their capacity to enforce his preferences, step aside for a man none of them had introduced. And something shifted in Gerald's face. Not fear, not yet, because Gerald Hargrove was the kind of man who arrived at fear slowly, protected from it for so long by money and social armor that his body had almost forgotten what it felt like. What crossed his face was something earlier than fear, something like confusion made of irritation, the expression of a man whose world has produced an unexpected variable. "Excuse me," Gerald said. The smile was still there, but it had changed quality, thinner at the edges, pulled a degree too tight. I don't believe we've been introduced. Dante looked at him for a moment, the kind of look that doesn't try to communicate anything because it doesn't need to. No, he said. We haven't. His voice was quiet, not soft. Quiet is different from soft. Soft is yielding. Quiet is controlled. His voice had the controlled quality of a man who has never once in his life needed to raise it to be heard. Are you a guest here? Gerald asked. I am. Well. Gerald spread his hand slightly, the gesture of a reasonable man surrounded by reasonable people. Then perhaps you understand that what's happening here is a private matter, and I'm going to stop you there, Dante said. The room was so quiet now that the champagne fizzing in someone's glass somewhere behind Nia was audible. Gerald Hargrove stopped. Something happened in his throat, a small movement, involuntary. He swallowed. Anyone who lays another hand on her, Dante said, answers to me. He didn't look around when he said it. He didn't gesture or raise his voice or do any of the things that people do when they want to make sure a statement lands broadly. He said it to Gerald Hargrove and to Gerald Hargrove alone, as though the 200 other people in the room were simply not relevant to the conversation, which was somehow the most frightening version of it. Gerald Hargrove stood very still for 3 full seconds. Then he laughed. It was not a good laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has decided that his best available move is to perform confidence he no longer entirely feels, and he executed it with the skill of someone who had practiced exactly this response for decades. Situations where an unexpected challenge required a public display of unshaken authority. That's very gallant of you, friend, Gerald said, but I think you've misjudged the situation here. This is a private event on private property, and this woman, he gestured toward Nia without looking at her, the gesture of a man pointing at a problem, has been dismissed. She hasn't, Dante said. You tried to dismiss her. That's different. The laugh again, slightly shorter this time. And who exactly are you to make that distinction? Someone who is watching. Gerald Hargrove waited for more explanation, more context, some social credential that would help him slot this man into a category he could manage. Nothing came, and the absence of it, the absolute self-containment, the total refusal to explain or justify or appeal, was more disorienting than anything Gerald had prepared for. Because in Gerald Hargrove's world, everyone explained themselves. Everyone lobbied for position. Everyone told you who they were and who they knew and why they mattered, because that was the currency of rooms like this one, and you used it or you disappeared. Men who didn't use it, men who simply stood there and offered nothing, existed outside the grammar of every social exchange Gerald had mastered, and that meant he had no map for this. Vivian appeared at her father's shoulder. She'd moved through the crowd quickly, drawn by some daughter's instinct that her father needed the visual reinforcement of her presence, and she looked at Dante with an expression that had traded the earlier amusement for something sharper. Dad, she said quietly, do you know who this is? Gerald glanced at her. No. Do you? She leaned close to him, said something Nia couldn't hear. Gerald Hargrove's face went through several changes very rapidly, the way a room changes when the power cuts. 1 second the lights are on, and everything is exactly where it was, and then it isn't, and you're standing in the dark trying to remember the layout. He recovered, or he tried to. He was very good at recovery. 3 decades of boardrooms and hostile negotiations and political maneuvering had made him excellent at recovering. He stood up straighter, and his expression settled back into something controlled. Dante Moretti, he said. The way you say a name when you need people to believe you already knew it. Dante said nothing. Well, Gerald glanced around the room. Making calculations. Nia could see him making them, could see the rapid internal accounting of a man who has just realized the odds on the table have shifted and is trying to determine whether he's already too far committed to fold. This is unexpected. I wasn't aware you were attending tonight. Clearly, Dante said. Well, you're welcome, of course. We're always honored. I'm not interested in being honored, Dante said. I'm interested in this woman leaving this building without being touched. Gerald looked at Nia, and for the first time that evening, The first time in 3 years, possibly longer, in Nia's experience of rooms like this, Gerald Hargrove looked at her with something other than casual ownership. He looked at her the way people look at things when they are trying to understand what those things mean to someone dangerous. She felt the weight of that look and hated that it was the first time all evening that she had felt visible in a way that mattered. Constance Hargrove materialized from somewhere to Gerald's left, silent, measured, the kind of woman who had survived 40 years of her husband's professional theater by developing a perfect instinct for when to appear and when to disappear. She touched Gerald's arm once, lightly. "Gerald," she said. That was all. He heard something in it that the rest of the room couldn't. His jaw shifted slightly. "Of course," he said, and his voice had changed. The performance quality drained out of it. What was left was older and flatter and careful. "Of course. There's no reason this has to become—" "Doesn't it bother you?" Nia said. Everyone looked at her. She hadn't planned to speak. The words had arrived without warning. Or not without warning, she had felt them building for most of the evening, had felt the pressure of them, but she had not decided to release them, and now they were out and she was standing in a room of 200 people looking at Gerald Hargrove with a wine stain on her uniform shirt, and she had absolutely nothing left to lose. "What you just did," she said. Her voice was even. She noticed it was even, the way you notice something surprising happening in your body. "In front of all of these people. Does it bother you at all?" Gerald Hargrove blinked. "Because I need you to understand something," Nia said. "I'm going to go home tonight, and I'm going to wash this shirt, and I am going to go to work again tomorrow somewhere else, and the day after that, and the day after that. And I'm going to be fine." She paused. "Are you going to be fine?" It was not the question anyone in that room expected. They had expected, she could feel what they expected, the way a crowd telegraphs its expectations. They had expected tears or rage or collapse, some kind of emotional performance that would confirm the story they had already decided this moment was telling. They had not expected a question delivered in a voice that was almost steady. Almost. Gerald Hargrove opened his mouth, and from somewhere outside, felt before it was heard, a low vibration that moved through the marble floor and up through the soles of Nia's feet, came the sound of engines. Many engines. The windows at the east end of the ballroom faced the estate's front approach, and the first person to look was one of the younger guests near the glass, a man in his 30s who happened to be standing closest. And what he saw made him take a step backward and say something very quiet that Nia couldn't hear. But the person next to him heard it, and they looked. And then the person next to them looked. That's how it spread. Not all at once, but person by person, the way a truth spreads through a crowd that was hoping it wasn't true. Black SUVs, not one or two. A fleet of them, appearing out of the darkness of the long estate driveway in a single unbroken procession, their headlights sweeping across the wet cobblestones in slow arcs as they circled and stopped and doors opened and men got out. Not running, not shouting, not doing any of the things that men in movies do when they want to communicate threat. Just standing, in suits, in the rain, arranging themselves with the quiet, unhurried efficiency of people who have done this before. Dozens of them. More than dozens. The service door behind Nia opened. 4 men came through it. They were dressed identically to the ones outside. Dark suits, no visible markings, no expressions designed for public consumption. And they positioned themselves on either side of her without touching her, without speaking to her, without doing anything that was not simply the physical fact of being present. Nia understood, with a precision that was almost clinical, that she was now standing inside a perimeter. Gerald Hargrove's head of security, a man named Voss, a former private contractor who Gerald paid very well to be unflappable, appeared at Gerald's shoulder and said something into his ear. Whatever it was, it took 4 seconds to say, and the color it left on Gerald's face when it was done was the color of old paper, pale and used and slightly brittle. "How many?" Gerald asked, his voice very low. Voss said a number. Gerald closed his eyes for less than a second. The length of time it takes to absorb something you'd been hoping wasn't true. Vivian had been watching her father. This was the tell she hadn't known to prepare for. Not the cars outside, not the men in the doorways, but her father's face, which was a face she had watched navigate impossible situations for 27 years, and which had never, in her memory, looked like that. "Daddy," she said. The word was different from the one she might have used an hour ago. Smaller, less certain. He didn't respond. Constance stepped forward. Constance, who had been mostly decorative for the last 40 minutes, moved with a sudden purpose that cut against everything the room had expected from her. Past Gerald, past Vivian, directly toward Dante Moretti, and she stopped 3 feet from him and looked at him with an expression that had traveled a very long distance in a very short time. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "I owe this woman an apology." The room shifted. "Constance," Gerald started. "I watched what happened," she said without looking at her husband. "I watched it, and I didn't stop it, and I am very sorry." She turned to Nia, and Nia looked at her. This woman in her late 50s, in a dress that cost more than Nia made in 2 months, standing in front of her with an expression that was complicated and cracked around the edges, and probably not entirely what it appeared to be, but was also, underneath all that, genuine in the way that something can be genuine and still complicated. Nia said nothing, because she didn't know what to say, because no script had prepared her for this, because she was tired, suddenly completely tired in a way that had nothing to do with her feet or her shift length, the kind of tired that comes from spending years holding yourself at a certain angle so the world's edges don't cut you, and then one night having someone rearrange the geometry entirely. "You don't have to accept it," Dante said quietly. To Nia. Just to her. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her. She looked at him. He was watching her the way he'd watched her earlier in the evening, patient, level, without the performance that everyone else in this room wore like a second face. And she saw, in a flash of recognition that she didn't entirely understand, that he was actually asking her, not performing generosity, not offering her a script, genuinely asking what she wanted. She realized, with a slow and slightly nauseating clarity, that she couldn't remember the last time someone in a room like this had asked what she wanted. Gerald Hargrove cleared his throat. He had been standing with his arms slightly apart from his body, the posture of a man who has stopped knowing what to do with his hands, and now he made one more attempt at the geometry of authority, squared his shoulders, raised his chin, and looked at Dante with an expression that had very little left in it. "I think," Gerald said carefully, "that there has been a misunderstanding tonight, a serious one, and I think it would be in everyone's interest to—" "Gerald," Dante's voice was very quiet. "Stop." Gerald stopped. "There wasn't a misunderstanding," Dante said. "You understood exactly what you were doing. That's what made it effective." The word effective landed in the room like something dropped from a height, because it was the right word. That was the thing about it. It was precisely, surgically the right word, and it named what had happened in a way that Gerald Hargrove's social defenses had no response to, because you cannot argue with a man who has correctly described your methodology. Gerald's mouth moved. No sound came out. "I want to know why," Nia said. Everyone looked at her again. She was looking at Gerald Hargrove. Her hands were at her sides. The wine stain on her uniform had dried to a deep rust color. She was not performing calm. She was past the performance of anything. She was simply standing in what was left of the evening and looking at the man who had engineered it and asking the only question she actually wanted answered. "Why me?" she said. "Specifically, tonight. Why me?" Gerald Hargrove looked at her for a long moment, and what crossed his face in that moment, quickly, the flash of something unguarded, was not cruelty. It was something older and smaller, and in some ways more disturbing than cruelty. Something that looked, if you caught it at exactly the right angle, like recognition, like she reminded him of something he had decided a very long time ago not to think about. Then it was gone. "This is a private matter," he said. "It stopped being private the moment you put her on a stage," Dante said. And in the silence that followed, something happened that no one in that room had prepared for. 3 phones buzzed simultaneously. Not the muted social media buzz of a notification, but the sharp, insistent pulse of an urgent message. Then four more. Then a cascading wave of them, spreading through the crowd, person by person, until the sound of it was like the room itself had developed a nervous system. People looked at their screens, looked at each other, looked at Gerald Hargrove. Gerald's own phone was in his jacket pocket. He didn't take it out. He didn't need to. He could read the situation developing in the faces of his guests the way you read weather in a sky you know well, and what he read there stopped him as cold and complete as anything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. Because the man he'd paid for 23 years to make certain problems disappear, the man who held in encrypted files on two separate servers the particular shape of Gerald Hargrove's financial history, that man had, 40 minutes ago, made a decision that Gerald Hargrove did not know about yet, but was about to. Voss appeared at his shoulder again, leaned in. 3 words. Gerald Hargrove sat down. Not in a chair. There was no chair near him. He sat on the edge of the platform he had pulled Nia onto an hour ago, the small raised stage from which he had performed his cruelty, and he sat there with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and the 200 people who had laughed with him looked at him with the fast, instinctive discomfort of people watching a structure they'd been standing on begin to develop cracks. Dante Moretti turned to Nia Brooks. "There are cars outside," he said. "You don't have to stay." She looked around the room, at the faces that had laughed, at Vivian, who had gone the color of chalk, at Constance, who was watching her husband with an expression that contained multitudes and none of them were warm, at the 200 people who had come to this party to perform their belonging and were now performing, slightly desperately, the theater of not knowing what was happening. She looked at the service door. 32 feet, except this time it was open. She picked up nothing. She hadn't set anything down. She had arrived here with her hands full, and somewhere in the last hour she had lost track of the tray and the glasses and all of it, and she was standing in the middle of this ballroom with nothing in her hands, and the door was open, and the rain was still coming down outside, and she was, under all of it, under the wine and the humiliation and the wild disorientation of the last 20 minutes, she was so angry. Not the hot, bright kind of anger that burns clean, the heavy, accumulated kind. The kind that builds over years in the body of someone who has been very good for a very long time, at telling herself that it isn't worth it, that letting it go is the intelligent choice, that survival requires her to absorb things that should not have to be absorbed. Years of it, all of it, sitting in her chest like a stone she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped feeling the weight. She looked at Gerald Hargrove sitting on the edge of that platform. "I want you to remember my name," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Nia Brooks, I want you to remember it, because I'm going to remember yours." She walked toward the door. Nobody stopped her, and behind her, as she reached the threshold, as the cold of the night air hit the damp fabric of her shirt and the rain found her face, she heard it, Dante's voice. Quiet. To the room. "Gentlemen?" The sound of briefcases opening. The rain hit her face and she kept walking. She didn't know where she was going. That was the truth of it. The unglamorous, exhausted truth that no one would have found cinematic. She walked out of that ballroom and through the service entrance and into the wet dark of the Hargrove Estate's back approach, and she had absolutely no destination. Her car was in the parking structure 2 blocks away. Her phone was in the small zippered pocket of her uniform jacket. She had $43 in her bank account until Thursday, and a shift at the Morrison Hotel catering department starting at 6 the next morning, and she was walking in the rain with a wine-stained uniform shirt, and her feet were destroying her. She walked anyway. The cold helped. That was something she'd learned a long time ago. Not a lesson anyone taught her, just something the body figures out on its own when it has been through enough. Cold is clarifying. Cold cuts through the noise and gives you something simple and immediate to focus on. And focus, in the aftermath of something like that ballroom, was what she needed most. Behind her, through the walls of the estate, she could hear, not voices, not specific words, but the register of something changing, the frequency of a room reorganizing itself around a new reality. She stopped walking when she reached the edge of the estate's rear garden, where an ornamental iron fence separated the manicured grounds from the public street beyond. She put both hands on the cold iron and stood there and breathed. In through her nose, out through her mouth, the way the therapist she'd seen for 8 months 3 years ago had taught her, and she had never entirely stopped doing, even after she'd stopped going. In, out. The anger was still there. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was sitting in her chest in that heavy sediment way, and she understood it was going to be there for a while, days maybe, before it started to thin. That was the nature of that kind of anger. It wasn't the kind that burned. It was the kind that settled. She heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. She turned before she could stop herself, some old reflex firing, the same reflex that made her count exits, and found one of Dante's men standing at a respectful distance. Young, maybe 25. He had an umbrella, which he was holding in her direction without moving closer, the way you offer something to an animal you don't want to startle. She looked at the umbrella. "Mr. Moretti asks if you'd be willing to speak with him," the young man said. His accent was faintly Italian, smoothed down by what sounded like years of American English layered on top. "In private. He says if the answer is no, his people will drive you wherever you'd like to go, and that's the end of it." Nia looked at him. "He said all of that?" "Those were his words, yes." She looked back at the iron fence, at the wet street beyond it, at the very ordinary, very cold night on the other side of that fence that she could walk into right now and resume her life and probably not sleep for a week. She took the umbrella. They put her in a room she hadn't seen before. Not the ballroom, not the service corridors she knew by memory, but a study somewhere in the east wing of the estate that she suspected Gerald Hargrove used for the kind of conversations he didn't want reflected in the chandeliers. Dark wood paneling, books that looked red rather than decorative, a single lamp in the corner throwing amber light across a leather chair, and a low table. Dante was standing when she came in, not performing standing, just actually upright, hands loosely at his sides, in the way of someone who has been still for a while and is comfortable with it. He looked at her when she entered the room, and then he looked at the chair across from the one he'd clearly been using, and she sat down because her feet were genuinely done, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. He sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The rain on the window was the loudest thing in the room. "You doing all right?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I'll be fine." He nodded, like that was an answer he respected, like the distinction between all right and fine was one he understood without needing it explained. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her with something that might, on a different face, have been a smile. "You know who I am. Vivian told your employer within about 40 seconds of my standing up." "I know your name," she said. "I Googled you in the bathroom. There wasn't a lot. There isn't supposed to be." "The things that were there," she started, "are mostly accurate," he said. "I'm not going to lie to you about what I am. It wouldn't help either of us." She looked at him, at the quality of stillness he carried, at the way he occupied the chair without filling it, not lounging, not rigid, just present in the way that some people are present who have spent years in rooms where the wrong movement cost things they couldn't afford to lose. "Why?" she said. He didn't ask her to clarify. He knew what she was asking. "Because I watched what happened," he said, "and I've seen things like it before. And there was a woman I didn't help a long time ago in a room not entirely unlike that one." He paused. "I don't make the same mistake twice." It was not a romantic answer. It was not the answer of a man constructing a persona. It was too specific and too quiet for that, and it sat in the room between them with the weight of something true. "What's happening in there?" she asked. "In the ballroom. My lawyers are presenting documents to several people who will find them very interesting," Dante said. "Gerald Hargrove has been doing things for a long time that he believed were invisible. They weren't invisible. They were just unexamined by people with the correct motivation to examine them." "What kind of things?" He looked at her steadily. "The kind that tend to make other people's nights very long." She heard it then. From somewhere in the estate, not close, somewhere on the other side of several walls, a voice raised sharply, male. Then another voice, female, cutting across the first. Then a long silence that felt worse than the voices. Dante didn't react. "He's going to try to stop it," Nia said. "He's going to try," Dante agreed. He has good lawyers. He has political relationships. He has 20 years of carefully maintained social infrastructure. He said this without heat, the way you might describe weather. None of it is going to be enough tonight. Why tonight? He was quiet for a moment. Because tonight, he made it personal. She understood then, not everything, not the full architecture of whatever Dante Moretti was, or what his empire actually looked like from the inside. But she understood this specific thing, that Gerald Hargrove had reached into a room and grabbed the wrong woman by the wrist, and the gravity of that error was still expanding, and would be expanding for some time. I need to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. The woman you mentioned, the one you didn't help. She held his gaze. Was she okay? Something moved behind his eyes, quick, contained immediately, with the practiced speed of someone who has been containing that specific thing for a long time. No, he said. She wasn't. The room held that for a moment. Then, from somewhere deeper in the estate, 3 things happened in rapid succession that Nia would spend the next several weeks trying to put in the right order. The first was the sound of a door hitting a wall, not closing, hitting, the full force impact of something swung open by someone who was not interested in being measured about it. The second was footsteps, fast and uneven on the corridor outside, the footsteps of someone not walking but covering ground. The third was Vivian Hargrove appearing in the doorway of the study, and the Vivian Hargrove who stood in that doorway was not the one from the ballroom, not the lacquered, weaponized social creature in the sapphire-adjacent dress. This was a woman whose mascara had traveled and whose hands were shaking visibly at her sides, and who looked in this light younger than 27 in a way that was difficult to look at. She looked at Dante, then at Nia, then at Dante again. My father is going to sign something, she said. Her voice was stripped of its earlier architecture, just raw sound moving through a throat that was too tight. They're making him sign something in the dining room right now, and nobody will tell me what it is, and his lawyer, his personal lawyer, the one who's been with him for 15 years, left 20 minutes ago. He just left. He took his case, and he didn't say anything to anyone, and he left. Dante said nothing. What did you do? Vivian asked. What did you give them? What he gave them is already a matter of public record, said a voice from behind Vivian. She turned. Standing in the corridor was a woman Nia had never seen before, mid-40s in a charcoal suit that had the specific plainness of government clothing, with a badge clipped to her lapel and the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have spent careers in rooms where excess of any kind is a liability. Behind her stood 2 more people, similarly dressed, and behind them 2 more. Federal investigators. Nia understood what she was looking at before she fully processed the details, the way you sometimes understand the shape of a thing before you can name it. Vivian Hargrove made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She stepped backward into the doorframe and her hand found the wood of it without her looking, the automatic reaching of someone whose balance has gone unreliable. The agent, her name, Nia would later learn, was Supervisory Agent Clara Rice, looked past Vivian into the study. Her eyes found Dante first, then moved to Nia, and in that movement something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, more like recognition of a specific kind of detail that she hadn't expected to find and that was now rearranging some internal calculation. Ms. Brooks, she said. Nia blinked. You know my name. We've had eyes on this estate for several months, Rice said. We know most of the names in that ballroom. Yours appeared in our documentation about 6 weeks ago in a context that I think will make more sense to you shortly. The floor shifted under Nia in a way that had nothing to do with the building. What context? She said. Rice looked at Dante. You want to tell her, or should I? Dante was very still. Nia looked at him. Tell me what? He met her eyes, and she saw it there. The thing he had been sitting with since before she walked into this room, the thing that had given his earlier answers that specific weight, that quality of knowing more than he was dispensing. Gerald Hargrove didn't choose you by accident tonight, Dante said. The room went very quiet. What does that mean? Her voice was flat. Not from calm, from the specific flatness that arrives when the body braces. It means your name appeared in documents that Gerald Hargrove's organization has been building for approximately 8 months, Rice said. Not your name specifically, at first. Your mother's. Nia stopped breathing. Hargrove's subsidiary company, a real estate investment firm operating under 3 different names, has been engaged in a systematic displacement campaign targeting a specific residential corridor on the south side of the city. Your mother lives in that corridor. She has for 31 years. Rice's voice was not unkind, but it was not gentle either. It was the voice of someone delivering facts with the understanding that facts, delivered correctly, are their own kind of mercy. The campaign involves, among other things, identifying individuals with ties to the community who might organize resistance. Your mother has been doing that, organizing, petitioning, attending city council meetings. She's been doing it for 2 years. Nia's hands were in her lap. She looked at them. She was flagged, Rice continued. And because she was flagged, people in Hargrove's organization began building a file on her immediate family, on you. A pause. We believe tonight was not random. We believe you were assigned to this event specifically. The silence that followed lasted long enough that the rain on the window became audible again. He knew, Nia said, before I even walked in. He knew who I was. We believe so. The wrist, she said. It came out barely above a whisper. He grabbed my wrist. He already knew my name. Nobody answered because nobody needed to. Something happened in Nia's chest. Not the heavy, settled anger from earlier. Something different, faster and colder and more dangerous. The kind of feeling that arrives when you understand that what you thought was a random cruelty was in fact a calculated one, and that the calculation was made in advance, and that you walked into it without knowing. She had been a target. Not incidentally, not because she happened to be there. She had been selected, positioned, brought into that room, and handed a tray and placed in the architecture of someone else's deliberate design. And the humiliation hadn't been random entertainment. It had been a message, delivered to her mother through her. You don't fight us. You don't organize. You don't stand at microphones in city council chambers and say our name, because look what we can do to your daughter in a room full of people who will laugh. She felt the understanding of it move through her body like cold water through a structure, finding every crack. Where is she? Nia said. My mother. Right now. She's at home, Rice said. We have someone outside her building. She's safe. Does she know it? Does she know what happened tonight? Not yet. Nia stood up. She stood up and then she didn't know what to do with the standing, where to put herself. And she walked to the window and put her hand flat on the glass the way she'd put her hands on the iron fence earlier, needing something cold and real and solid. Outside, through the rain-blurred glass, she could see the black SUVs still arranged along the estate's front approach. The men in suits still standing in the wet, patient, and motionless, like something permanent. Vivian Hargrove made a sound from the doorway. Nia turned. Vivian was looking at her with an expression that Nia did not have an easy name for. Not guilt, not quite, because guilt implies a person who was unaware of the wrong and has now learned it, and what Vivian's face contained was more complicated than that. It was the expression of someone who had known, on some level, that the machinery around her was not clean and had made the daily choice not to look at the moving parts. Did you know? Nia asked. Vivian's jaw moved. I didn't know the specifics. Did you know it wasn't random? Silence. Vivian. I knew he wanted to make a point to someone, she said. Her voice had lost every layer of performance. I didn't know it was... She stopped. Started again. My father makes points. That's what he does. He constructs situations. I didn't know who you were to... She stopped again. Say it, Nia said. I didn't know who you were to him. I thought you were... Her throat moved. I thought it was just about you. Just about you. 200 people laughing, wine on her shirt. The deliberate, engineered humiliation of a woman whose only crime was being the daughter of a woman who said their name in a public meeting. Just about you. Get out of the doorway, Dante said quietly to Vivian. She got out of the doorway. Rice stepped into the room properly, and her 2 colleagues came with her, and the dynamic in the study reorganized itself around their presence, the way a room reorganizes around a change in temperature. She set a tablet on the low table and turned it toward Nia. "We need to ask you some questions," she said. "Not about tonight specifically. About the last 18 months. About whether you noticed anything. People following you, unusual contact from Hargrove's affiliated companies, employment interruptions that seemed coincidental." She looked at Nia steadily. "We think you may have experienced more of this than you realize." Nia looked at the tablet, at the form on its screen with her name already populated at the top. Her name. Already there. Already in their system for months. She thought about the jobs that had fallen through, 3 of them in the last year and a half. Catering contracts that had seemed solid until they weren't. Opportunities that evaporated without explanation. She had put it down to the economy, to competition, to the specific randomness of the service industry, which was an industry that ran on randomness, and she knew that. She thought about it differently now. She thought about the landlord of her apartment building raising the rent 18% 8 months ago, an increase so far outside the norm that 3 of her neighbors had moved out within 60 days. She thought about the city permit that had delayed her friend Marcus's small restaurant expansion for 11 months on procedural grounds that the city clerk had never been fully able to articulate. She had not connected these things. There had been nothing to connect them with. No thread visible from where she was standing, no pattern discernible from the ground level. But looking at the form on the tablet, with her name already at the top, she began, slowly, to connect them. "He's been doing this for a long time," she said. It was not a question. "Gerald Hargrove's organization has been operating this particular displacement strategy for at least 5 years, Rice said. "The South Side Corridor is the 3rd neighborhood. The first 2—" She paused. "The first 2 don't exist the way they used to." Nia put her finger on the edge of the tablet, did not pick it up yet. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Everything you remember," Rice said. "Every job, every interaction, every piece of paperwork that seemed irregular, every neighbor who mentioned something strange." She held Nia's gaze. "Your mother has documentation that she's been keeping for 2 years. Good documentation. The kind that an organized woman keeps when she understands on instinct that she's going to need it eventually. Combined with what we already have, combined with what Moretti's people brought tonight." She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "How bad is it for him?" Nia asked. Rice considered the question with the professional care of someone who does not make promises about ongoing investigations. "Bad enough that his lawyer left," she said finally. Dante stood. He'd been sitting so still for so long that the movement of him rising pulled every eye in the room. He looked at Nia and she realized she had been waiting, without knowing it, for some indicator from him. Some read of the situation from a person who understood the geography of rooms like this better than she did, and she felt a flash of irritation at herself for it. She had not asked for a compass. She did not need one. And yet— "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said, "about any of it." "I know that," she said. "I know you know it," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." From somewhere deeper in the estate, past the corridor, past whatever room Gerald Hargrove was currently sitting in with people he could no longer control, came the sound of a single raised voice and then nothing. The nothing was worse. Nia looked at the tablet again. She thought about her mother standing at a city council microphone, about the specific quality of her mother's voice in those settings. Not loud, not angry, just precise and unbothered and absolutely unwilling to be moved. The voice of a woman who had stood her ground so long that standing was simply her resting state. About how that voice had made Nia proud and frightened in equal measure for 2 years, and how she had told her mother once quietly, over the phone, "Mama, maybe ease up a little, you know? These people don't play fair?" And her mother had said, "Baby, I know they don't. That's why I'm not stopping." She picked up the tablet. "Tell me what you need," she said to Rice. And across the room, in the amber light of the corner lamp, Dante Moretti sat back down, and from his jacket pocket he removed a phone and he made a call. And when it was answered, he said 4 words in Italian that none of the people in that room understood, but that would, over the course of the next 72 hours, set in motion something so comprehensive and so surgical that Gerald Hargrove would later describe the experience of it. To the attorney who replaced the one who had walked out, as feeling less like being caught and more like being taken apart from the inside. The rain kept coming. The cars were still outside. Gerald Hargrove, somewhere in his estate, was learning what it felt like to be the one without a map. And Nia Brooks was learning something she had not expected to learn tonight. That the machinery that had been used against her had a counterweight, and that counterweight had a name. And the name was not vengeance, and it was not justice. Not yet. But it was something that felt, when she held it, like the first solid thing she'd been handed in a very long time. She began to talk. She talked for 2 hours and 19 minutes. She knew the exact length of it because at some point one of Rice's colleagues had set a small recorder on the table between them and pressed a button and said the time and date into it before falling silent. And Nia had looked at the red light on the recorder and thought, this is the moment where it becomes real. Not the ballroom, not the wine on her shirt, not even the understanding about her mother. This, the red light, the time said aloud, her name on a form, this was the moment where it became something that existed outside of her body. She talked about the jobs, about the contract with Meridian Event Services that had been confirmed in writing and then quietly canceled 3 weeks later with an apology so bureaucratic it contained nothing that could be challenged. About the one before that, about the apartment rent increase and the city permits, and the specific creeping quality of the last 18 months that she had filed away under the general category of bad luck, because she had not had a framework to file it anywhere else. Rice asked precise questions, not leading ones. She was too good for that. She asked the kind of questions that opened space rather than filled it, that gave Nia room to find the edges of things she hadn't fully examined before. And what Nia found, in that room, in the amber light, with the rain still on the window and the low sound of organizational machinery working somewhere in the rest of the estate, was that the edges of things were farther out than she'd thought. That the shape of what had been done to her and her mother and their neighborhood was larger than she had allowed herself to see, because seeing it fully would have cost her something she needed to keep. The ability to function, to get up, to go to work. You couldn't hold the full weight of it and still tie your shoes in the morning, so you held less. You held just enough. She understood now that this was not weakness. This was how people survived precision cruelty. Cruelty designed specifically to avoid crossing any single visible line while systematically eliminating the ground beneath your feet. At 11:47, Rice's colleague touched her arm and leaned close and said something quietly. Rice looked at the tablet on the table between them, then at Nia. "We need a short break," she said. "What happened?" Nia said. Rice looked at her for a moment with the evaluating expression of someone deciding how much to give. "Gerald Hargrove's legal team filed an emergency injunction 40 minutes ago," she said, attempting to suppress the financial documentation on the grounds that it was obtained improperly. "Was it?" "No," Rice said, "but it buys time. And time is what his attorneys are selling him right now at a very high hourly rate." She stood. Her two colleagues stood with her. "We'll be back in 10 minutes. There's water on the table." They left. Nia sat alone in the study. The water on the table was in a crystal pitcher that probably cost more than her security deposit. She poured some into a glass and drank it, and set the glass down and looked at the bookshelves on the opposite wall and thought about her mother, about whether she was asleep or awake, whether she'd heard anything yet, whether she was sitting in that apartment on Caldwell Street that she'd lived in for 31 years with the television on low the way she always did, the news channel she hated but couldn't stop watching because she said not watching it felt like driving with your eyes closed. The door opened, not Rice. Dante came in and sat down in the chair he'd been sitting in before, and he did not say anything for a moment, and neither did she, and the silence was not uncomfortable in the way that silence between strangers is uncomfortable. It had a different quality. The quality of two people who have each been through a version of the same kind of night and don't need to explain that to each other. "The injunction," she said. "Won't hold," he said. "His team knows it won't hold. It's a procedural move to create daylight. They're hoping to negotiate in that daylight." "Negotiate what?" "Terms," he said. "Reduced exposure, cooperation for consideration. The standard architecture of a man who has just realized he can't win the fight and is trying to decide how much of himself he can sell to limit the damage." She looked at her hands. "He's going to get away with some of it." "Probably," Dante said, not softening it. She appreciated that. How much? I don't know yet. That depends on choices he hasn't made yet, and on choices your federal agents make in the next 48 hours. He paused. And on you. She looked up. Your testimony matters, he said. Not just procedurally. The documentation is strong, so the financial trail is clear enough that a trained accountant could walk a jury through it in 3 hours. But what you witnessed tonight, what your mother witnessed over 2 years, the specific, targeted quality of the campaign against your community, that's the human architecture of it. That's what makes it more than a tax case. She was quiet for a moment. You've done this before, she said. Not an accusation, an observation. I've been in rooms adjacent to it, he said carefully. That's not what I mean. She looked at him directly. You know how federal cases work. You know how investigations build. You know what testimony does and doesn't accomplish. You know all of this because you've been on both sides of rooms like this one. He held her gaze. Yes. And tonight you chose this side. Tonight I chose you, he said. The sides are secondary. It was the most direct thing he'd said to her, and she felt it land and didn't know what to do with it, and so she filed it in the same place she filed things she needed to think about when she had more room. There's something else, he said. She waited. Hargrove's lawyers made a call tonight that we intercepted, before the injunction, before any of the formal proceedings. His voice had shifted, still quiet, but with an undertone now that she hadn't heard in it before, something tighter. The call was to a man named Breckett, Elliot Breckett. He runs a private risk management firm that Hargrove has used for 12 years for things he doesn't want connected to his primary legal team. Risk management, she repeated. He manages risks, Dante said, the kind that can't be managed by lawyers. The room got very still. My mother, Nia said. My people are already there, he said immediately. I made the call 40 minutes ago. She's not alone. Nia felt something move through her chest. Not relief, not entirely, because relief requires the danger to be fully past. And this was not fully past, but something adjacent to it. The feeling of a structure that was threatening to collapse being caught by something external before it could. She doesn't know any of this is happening, Nia said. No. She's going to... She stopped, thought about her mother's voice, the precision of it, the unbothered quality. She's going to be furious. Something moved in Dante's face. She sounds like someone worth knowing. The door opened again before Nia could answer. Not Rice this time either. Vivian Hargrove stood in the doorway. She had been crying, not recently, but recently enough that the evidence was still organized on her face. She was holding something. A manila envelope, letter size, slightly bent at one corner as though she'd been holding it in both hands for a while. She looked at Dante. I need to give this to the investigators, she said. I need to give it to them before my father's lawyers find out I have it. Dante didn't move. What is it? Nia asked. Vivian looked at her. 2 years ago, my father asked me to review some investment documents for a subsidiary company. I'm on the board nominally. Usually it's ceremonial. I sign what they put in front of me. I don't ask. She stopped. Her jaw moved. I asked that time. I don't know why. I asked, and my father told me it was fine, and I didn't believe him, and I made a copy. She looked at the envelope in her hands. I put it in a safety deposit box in a bank that isn't connected to any of our accounts, and I didn't look at it again for 1.5 years. Did you look at it after that? Nia said. 3 months ago, Vivian said. After the 3rd city council meeting, my father's assistant mentioned like it was nothing, like my father tracking a community meeting was just a thing that happened. She paused. I looked at it and I understood what I was looking at and I put it back. You put it back, Nia said. I put it back, Vivian said. Her voice didn't try to justify it. She said it the way you say something true that you have stopped trying to argue with. And then tonight happened, and I drove to the bank at 10:15 because it's a 24-hour branch, and I got it. She held the envelope out toward Dante. He didn't take it. Give it to Agent Rice, he said. Not to me. Vivian looked at him. If I give it to them, I can't take it back. You couldn't take tonight back either, he said. You just hadn't accepted that yet. something broke in Vivian's face. Not dramatically, not the theatrical collapse of a woman performing her own undoing. Just a quiet fracture, the kind that happens when a person has been holding a particular structure in place for a long time and suddenly lacks the specific muscle for it. She stood there for another moment, the envelope in both hands. Then she walked out toward the corridor to find Rice. Nia and Dante sat in the quiet that remained. "She'll try to use it to negotiate leniency for herself," Dante said. Not with contempt, with the flat accuracy of someone who has watched this sequence before. "Will she get it?" "Probably some," he said. "Enough to matter to her." "And her mother?" "Constance Hargrove," Dante said, "has been cooperating with a separate federal inquiry for 11 months, quietly, under an arrangement that began before tonight." Nia stared at him. "The woman in the sapphire dress," he said, "who stood in that ballroom and said nothing, she has been building a case against her own husband for nearly a year." "She was there tonight," Nia said. "She watched all of it happen." "She couldn't break cover," Dante said. "She watched him pull me onto that stage." "Yes." "And she said nothing." "Until she did," Dante said quietly. "She came to you. It was the only thing she could give you in that room." Nia sat with that for a moment, with the specific uncomfortable complexity of it, with the way it refused to organize itself into something she could respond to cleanly, either with anger or understanding. It wanted to be both, and she didn't have room for both right now. "She could have told someone," Nia said. "She could have." "People make choices about when to act," Dante said. "Not always the choices we'd make. Not always the right choices. But her documentation is what's going to hold this case together when his lawyers try to find the procedural gaps." "I know," Nia said. And she did. She knew it, and she hated it, and she filed that in the same place she filed the other things she needed more room to hold. "I know." The next 3 hours moved differently than the first two had. Faster and slower simultaneously. The paradox of time in high-stakes rooms, where the minutes between significant events drag and the significant events themselves happen at a speed that leaves you catching up. Rice came back. She took the envelope from Vivian in the corridor outside the study, and she did not react to its contents in any way that was visible through the glass of the study window, but one of her colleagues made a phone call immediately after and spoke for 40 seconds, and then hung up and made another call. At 12:40, Gerald Hargrove's emergency injunction was denied. Nia wasn't in the room when it happened. She was in the corridor, standing near a window that looked out onto the estate's east garden, when she heard Rice's voice through the study door, not the words, just the register, and understood from its quality that something had moved. She felt it in her feet first, the specific vibration of something large beginning to fall. She was back in her chair when Rice came in and said, "The injunction was denied. We're moving forward." "What does that mean specifically?" Nia said. "It means the documentation stands. It means we'll be making further requests of the Hargrove financial institutions beginning tomorrow morning, and that an asset freeze application has been filed with the district court." She paused. "It means tonight is now a beginning." Nia looked at her. "And my community? The displacement campaign? The people who've already been pushed out of the first two neighborhoods?" Rice's face did something careful. "That investigation is ongoing. The documentation that's been provided tonight opens lines of inquiry that will take time to fully—" "People don't have time," Nia said. "The people who've already lost housing don't have the time a federal investigation takes." "I understand that." "Do you?" Rice looked at her, not defensively, with the specific, slightly tired look of a person who encounters this particular truth regularly and has not yet found a response to it that feels adequate. "Yes," she said, "I do understand it, and I want to be honest with you about what tonight can and cannot accomplish." "Then be honest." "Tonight begins the legal dismantling of Gerald Hargrove's financial infrastructure," Rice said. "It does not undo what has already been done to the families that have already been displaced. That's a separate set of proceedings, civil primarily, that will require separate representation and separate resources and significant time." She paused. "What tonight can do is make those proceedings possible. It can create a public record. It can make the machinery visible. The machinery has always been visible to the people it ran over, Naya said. Yes, Rice said. It has. The room held that. Then from the corridor came a sound. Rapid footsteps. More than one person, and a voice that Nia didn't recognize saying something sharp and short. And then a second voice responding. And then the sound of the front entrance of the estate opening, the large double doors, the cold air rush of outside coming in. Rice was on her feet immediately. Her hand was at her hip, not on a weapon, but near one, the instinctive position of someone whose body has trained itself to close the distance to its defenses fast. Dante was already at the doorway. The corridor was bright. 2 of Dante's men were moving toward the front entrance, and 3 of Rice's agents were moving in the same direction, and in the confluence of those movements there was a quality of urgency that hadn't been there before. Controlled, but tight. The specific tension of trained people who have received information requiring immediate physical response. Nia followed. She followed because she was not built to stay behind. Because whatever was happening involved her life and her mother and her community, and she had been kept in the dark about enough things for enough years that she was not going to stand in an amber-lit room and wait to be informed. The front entrance of the Hargrove estate opened onto the main approach, and what she saw when she came through it hit her differently than the fleet of SUVs had hit her through glass. One of the black vehicles had been repositioned. Its doors were open. 2 of Dante's people were on phones, moving with the coordinated, low-voiced efficiency of people triangulating a location. Rice was next to them, her own phone up, and Nia heard pieces of what she said. Confirm the address and what's the response time, and do not let anyone in or out of, and the pieces assembled themselves in Nia's understanding before she'd consciously finished hearing them. Breckett, Dante said, at her shoulder. He'd come through the door behind her. She turned. He moved faster than expected, Dante said. He's at Caldwell Street. The world made a sound like static. My mother, she said. My people are there, he said. She's not alone. Is she okay? She's safe. Dante. His name in her mouth for the first time, and she heard herself say it. And it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Is she okay right now? He pulled out his phone, made a call. It picked up on the second ring, and he said one word, a name she didn't recognize, and listened for 4 seconds, and then said, Tell her. He put the phone to Nia's ear. A voice she knew better than any other voice in the world said, Nia? Mama. The word came out smaller than she intended. You okay? I'm fine. Her mother's voice was exactly what she'd described to Dante. Precise, unbothered, already assessing. There are about 6 very large men in dark coats in my hallway, and nobody will tell me who sent them. Baby, what is going on? Nia closed her eyes, opened them. The rain was still coming down, and she was standing in front of Gerald Hargrove's estate, and the cars were arranged around her, and Rice was on the phone 12 feet away, and Dante was looking at her with that patient, undemanding attention. I'll explain everything, she said. I promise. Are you safe? I told you I'm fine, her mother said, and then, in a slightly different register, Are you safe? She stopped. Yeah, Mama. I'm okay. Where are you? The Hargrove estate. A pause. Gerald Hargrove's estate? Yes. Her mother was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Nia could hear her processing it. The specific, organized silence of a woman running through implications. That man has been trying to ruin this neighborhood for 2 years, her mother said. I know. He hired someone to come to my building tonight. I know that too. Another pause. Then, in a voice that dropped to something very quiet and very certain, Did we get him? Nia looked at the estate in front of her. At the doors still open, light spilling out. At Rice, moving inside now, her people with her. At Dante, standing in the rain without an umbrella, unhurried, watching her with the expression of a man who is content to wait as long as she needs. We're working on it, she said. Her mother said, Then go work on it. I'm fine here. She handed the phone back to Dante. "She wants to know who you are," Dante said, looking at the phone after he'd ended the call. "What did she say?" "Nothing. She just asked." Despite everything, despite the rain and the exhaustion and the wine stain, she could still feel cold against her skin. Nia felt something move in her face that was connected to an emotion she hadn't had access to in several hours. "She'll figure it out," she said. They went back inside. The estate had changed. The ballroom. She passed its entrance on the way back to the study and glanced through the open doors, had transformed from the theater of cruelty she'd left 2 hours ago into something between a crime scene and a conference room. Most of the guests were gone. The ones who remained were seated, separately, with federal agents beside them. The particular arrangement of people who have been asked to wait and who understand that waiting is no longer optional. The crystal chandeliers were still on, still throwing their expensive light, still completely indifferent to the revised meaning of the room below them. Vivian was seated at one of the tables, alone, the envelope gone from her hands. She was looking at nothing. Gerald Hargrove was not visible. He was somewhere in the back of his house with whatever lawyers were still willing to be in the same room with him, receiving the specific education of a man who had spent decades believing his walls were impenetrable and who was now watching them opened from the inside. Nia walked past the ballroom and back to the study and sat down. She picked up her glass of water, which was still on the table. She drank it. She set the glass down. And then, because the body keeps its own records regardless of what the mind is managing, she realized that her hands were shaking. Not from fear, past fear. They were shaking from the specific cellular exhaustion of a person who has been in a sustained state of fight or flight for over 4 hours and whose nervous system has just received the first tentative signal that the immediate threat level has dropped and is now, for the first time, processing the cost. She put her hands flat on her thighs and looked at them. Dante sat down across from her. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer her something to hold or ask if she needed anything. He just sat there, which was, she was beginning to understand, his specific kind of presence, not filling space, just occupying it, in a way that made the space feel less empty without demanding anything from her in return. Rice came back at 1:23. She stood in the doorway with her tablet and a new expression. Not the careful evaluating expression from before, but something that had sharpened and settled, the expression of a person who has just had a confirmation they needed. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "there are some things I need to show you." She came into the room and put the tablet on the table. What Nia saw on the screen had Gerald Hargrove's name at the top, and below it, in the precise damning language of financial documentation, was the full shape of what had been done. Not in summary, not in approximation, but in the specific time-stamped transaction-by-transaction architecture of a campaign that had started 5 years ago and had moved through 3 communities and had displaced over 400 families and had used as its instruments everything from fraudulent permits to coerced landlords to targeted employment interference. All of it traceable, all of it documented, all of it building toward this room, this night, this tablet on this table. Nia read it. She read it slowly, line by line, without hurrying, because it deserved to be read that way. Because every transaction on that screen represented a family, a door, a life arranged around a particular street on a particular block that someone with money and a strategy had decided was more valuable as something else. She read it, and when she was done, she looked up. Rice was watching her. 400 families, Nia said. At minimum, Rice said. The full count is still being compiled. And the ones in my neighborhood, the ones still there. The freeze application will halt active displacement proceedings as of tomorrow morning, Rice said. It's not a permanent solution, but it stops the clock. Nia looked at the tablet. She thought about her mother in that apartment on Caldwell Street. 31 years. The neighbor across the hall who'd brought soup when her mother had her hip replacement. The bodega on the corner that didn't have self-checkout because the owner, Mr. Tran, had said once that self-checkout was just a way of taking jobs from people who needed jobs in neighborhoods where people needed jobs. The community garden 3 blocks down that her mother had helped plant 12 years ago. The one with the tomatoes that got stolen every August by people who the committee had eventually stopped calling thieves because they'd decided it was just the neighborhood sharing. All of it under pressure, all of it being systematically thinned and replaced and erased by the machinery of a man sitting somewhere in this house with his lawyers. She looked at Rice. "What do you need me to do?" she said. And Rice opened her mouth to answer, and from the back of the estate came a sound, sharp, sudden, undeniable, that stopped every person in that room mid-motion, a door hitting a wall. Then, Gerald Hargrove's voice, raw and stripped of every layer of performance it had carried for 61 years, saying something Nia couldn't make out. Then Voss, his head of security, saying something back, something short, something with a no in it. Then nothing. Dante was already on his feet. Rice was on her radio. And Nia sat very still in the amber light with her hands flat on her thighs, feeling, through the marble floor, through the soles of her shoes, the specific vibration of a structure that had spent decades being built and was now, floor by floor, beginning its descent. The question was not whether it was falling. The question was what it would take with it on the way down, and who would be left standing when the air finally cleared. The sound of Gerald Hargrove's voice hitting the walls of his own estate was different from every other sound that building had produced that night. Everything else, the laughter, the crystal, the engines outside, the procedural language of federal agents, all of it had the quality of things happening to the house. This was something happening inside it, something tearing from the inside, the way old structures fail. Not from external pressure, but from the accumulated stress of weight they were never designed to hold, finally finding the one point where the math stops working. Dante was through the study door before Rice had her radio to her lips. Nia followed. She moved down the corridor toward the sound without deciding to, the way she'd followed everything tonight. Not from strategy, not from courage exactly, but from the simple, stubborn insistence of a person who has spent too many years on the outside of rooms where decisions about her life were being made. Not tonight. The corridor opened into a large receiving room adjacent to the estate's formal dining area, and what she found there was not what the sound had suggested. No violence. No physical confrontation. Gerald Hargrove was standing near the far wall with his back partially toward the room, one hand flat against the dark wood paneling, his head down. Voss stood 6 feet away, arms at his sides, with the particular stillness of a man who has just delivered news he did not want to deliver, and is now waiting to see what shape the damage takes. 2 of Gerald's remaining lawyers, junior associates, young, holding leather portfolios like shields, stood near the dining table. They looked at Dante when he came through the door, then at Rice behind him, and something in their posture made a small, involuntary adjustment, the body's honest response to understanding that the room has changed. Gerald Hargrove did not turn around. "The asset freeze went through," Voss said. He was speaking to no one specifically. To the room. To the particular piece of air between himself and his employer. "All primary accounts. The subsidiaries are being processed." Gerald's hand moved against the paneling, fingers spread, then curled, then spread again. "All of them," he said. His voice was not the voice from the ballroom. It was older, smaller, the voice of the thing underneath the performance, finally audible. "The Meridian accounts, too," Voss said. "Yes." Gerald turned around. Nia had expected many things from his face in this moment. She had spent time in the last 4 hours composing, without quite realizing she was doing it. An image of what it would look like when Gerald Hargrove finally understood what was happening to him. She had expected rage, because rage was how he had operated all evening. She had expected the cold, calculated recalibration of a man pivoting to his next position. She had expected, at the very least, the continued performance of a man who understood that being watched meant being managed. What she had not expected was the particular unguarded expression of someone who looks, for one unprotected second, exactly as old as they are. He was 61 years old, and for 1 second, in the light of his own receiving room, surrounded by the wreckage of a night he had engineered and lost, he looked all of it, every year of it, without the maintenance. Then the second passed, and he found something closer to his working face, and he looked at Dante. "How much of this was yours?" he said. "The documentation came from multiple sources," Dante said. "I organized its delivery. You've been building this. I've been watching you build it," Dante said. There's a difference. Gerald looked at him for a moment. For how long? Long enough. Gerald's jaw moved. Why? You know why, Dante said. Something shifted in Gerald's face. Not guilt. Guilt had a softening quality, and this had no softness in it. It was the expression of a man who has been carrying something for a long time under a layer of deliberate non-acknowledgement, and who has just had that layer removed by an external force and is now standing exposed to something he decided years ago he didn't have to feel. Margaret Osei, Dante said. His voice was very quiet. The name sat in the room the way certain words sit, with weight that is disproportionate to its syllables. Nia didn't know it. She watched Gerald Hargrove's face receive it and understood, from what his face did, that she was witnessing the arrival of something that had been traveling toward this room for a very long time. Voss took a step backward. The two young lawyers looked at each other and then looked away. Margaret Osei, Gerald said. Not a question. The way you say a name when you're confirming to yourself that you heard it correctly. She organized the Whitmore Avenue community in 2009, Dante said. Against your first displacement campaign, the one you ran through a company called Greenfield Urban Partners. She attended every city council meeting for 14 months. She collected signatures, she got coverage in 3 local papers. He paused, and then she lost her job, and her apartment, and her daughter's school lost its funding, and within 18 months she had relocated to another state because staying had become materially impossible. Gerald said nothing. She was the template, Dante said. Everything you built after her, the methodology, the targeting of organizers, the employment interference, the permit delays, you built it on what worked against her. That's, Gerald started. I was there, Dante said. I was in Chicago in 2009, and I watched what happened to Margaret Osei, and I didn't do anything about it because at that point it wasn't my business, and I told myself that. He stopped. That was a mistake I've been reconsidering for 16 years. The room was completely still. Nia looked at Dante, at the flat, unflinching quality of his voice as he said it, at the specific absence of performance in it. No drama, no self-congratulation, no invitation for absolution. Just the statement of a man who has lived a long time with a particular calculation and has finally changed the variables. Gerald Hargrove sat down. Not in a chair. He sat on the edge of the large dining table, both hands gripping the wood, his weight on his arms, and he looked at the floor. It was business, he said. It came out drained of the confidence that phrase usually carries. It was the last reach of a man who has been using a particular justification for so long he no longer fully believes it but has nothing else to put in its place. I know, Dante said. That's the part that doesn't get better with time. Rice moved past both of them. She walked to Gerald Hargrove and she stood in front of him and she read him his rights in the measured, unhurried voice of someone who has done this many times and understands that the moment requires nothing from her but accuracy. Gerald sat on the edge of his own dining table and received it with his eyes on the floor and his hands still gripping the wood. And when she was done, he looked up at her and said, I want my attorney. Your attorney of record has withdrawn from representation, Rice said. You'll be provided opportunity to contact alternative counsel. There are others on the team. Mr. Hargrove, Rice said. Not unkindly, with the specific patience of someone who does not intend to argue. There will be time for all of that, but right now I need you to come with me. He looked at Voss. Voss looked back at him. And in that look passed something that Nia recognized. She'd seen versions of it before. In the faces of people who have given years of loyalty to a structure and are now watching that structure fail and are doing the private, rapid accounting of what that means for them. Voss had known. She understood. Not the full extent, but enough. He had known enough, and he had stayed because staying was paid, and paid well, and because the specific comfort of not examining things closely is a comfort available to anyone willing to not examine things closely. I'm sorry, sir, Voss said. It was not an apology for tonight. It was an older apology, for an older thing. Gerald Hargrove looked at his head of security for a long moment. Then he stood, released the table, straightened his jacket with both hands. The gesture so practiced it was practically involuntary, the last bit of performance still operating on muscle memory, and walked with Rice out of the room. The two young lawyers followed at a distance, already on their phones. Voss stood where he was. Dante looked at him. "You can go," Dante said. Voss nodded. He picked up his radio and his jacket from the chair near the door, and he walked out, and the sound of his footsteps in the corridor diminished and was gone. Nia was alone in the receiving room with Dante. The chandeliers in the ballroom, down the hall, were still on. She could see the light of them from where she stood, throwing their expensive glow into the empty room, illuminating the debris of an evening that had ended without anyone dimming them. Abandoned champagne glasses, the specific residue of gathered wealth disbanding in a hurry, the marble floor recently cleaned and now catching the light off a few remaining droplets that someone had spilled and no one had wiped. She thought about the tray she'd dropped when Gerald grabbed her wrist. Somebody had cleaned it up. Some other member of the service staff, doing their job, staying invisible, cleaning up the mess that the visible people made. She looked at her hands. The wine stain on her shirt had dried completely now. Dark rust, the color of old things. She would wash it out tomorrow, she knew. It wasn't a permanent stain, despite how permanent everything about tonight had felt while it was happening. Dish soap and cold water. Her mother had taught her that. Cold water for organic stains, hot water sets them. Her mother had a specific, practical knowledge of how to remove traces of other people's messes from fabric. She thought, I need to call her back. She thought, I need to sit down first. She sat on the floor, not a chair. The floor, the marble floor of Gerald Hargrove's receiving room, her back against the wall, her knees up, her shoes she had been wearing for 7 hours, finally. Just shoes again, rather than a surface she was maintaining. She expected Dante to say something, to offer her something, to do what people did in moments like this, hover, reach, project concern in ways that required management. He sat down on the floor too, his back against the opposite wall, the receiving room between them, both of them on the marble, and he didn't say anything. That was how Rice found them, 11 minutes later. She stood in the doorway and looked at the two people sitting on opposite sides of the floor of the Hargrove receiving room, and her expression, for just a moment, lost its professional architecture and became something else, something that recognized the specific post-operational exhaustion of people who have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and have only just set it down. "He's in custody," she said. "We'll be transporting shortly." A pause. "Breckett was apprehended at Caldwell Street at 1:52. Your mother is fine. She made coffee for the agents, apparently." Despite everything, Nia laughed. It came out smaller than it should have been and rougher, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a second, but it was real laughter, the first real thing her body had done in hours that wasn't fear or anger or endurance. "That sounds right," she said. "She also wants to know when you're coming home," Rice said. "She asked me specifically to convey that." "I'll go soon," Nia said. Rice looked at her, then at Dante, then back at Nia. "There will be a formal deposition process beginning next week. You'll receive contact from our office with the procedural details. In the meantime," she paused, and in the pause Nia heard the weight of something Rice was deciding how to carry. "What happened tonight in that ballroom is going to become part of the public record of this case. The humiliation you were subjected to, it wasn't incidental. It was documented pattern behavior used as an intimidation instrument against community organizers. Your experience tonight is material evidence." "What does that mean practically?" Nia said. "It means it will be heard," Rice said. "In a room where being heard has legal consequence." She looked at her directly. "I want you to know that." Nia looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. Not with ease. She said it the way you say things you are choosing to believe rather than things you already believe, with the understanding that choosing is where it starts. Rice nodded once. She looked at the room, at the chandeliers still burning down the hall, at the marble, at the two people on opposite walls, and then she left. They waited until the sounds of the federal presence in the estate had diminished to something distant, and then to nothing. Vivian Hargrove appeared in the doorway at some point after 2 a.m. She stood there without coming in, and she looked at Nia on the floor, and her face went through something complicated and then simplified. "My mother wants to speak with you," she said, "before you leave." If you're willing. Nia thought about it. Where is she? The sitting room at the end of the east corridor. She's been there for a while. Nia stood. Her knees registered the hours. She didn't ask Dante to come, and he didn't offer, and that was the right shape of it. She found Constance Hargrove in a smaller room than she'd expected. Not grand, not performed. A reading room, really. Books that were actually arranged by frequency of use rather than aesthetic. A lamp that was clearly someone's working lamp and not a decorative one. A woman sitting in a wingback chair with her shoes off and silk stockings, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. She looked up when Nia came in. "I won't ask you to sit," Constance said. "You don't have to stay." "I know," Nia said. Constance looked at her hands around the cold cup. "I want to tell you that I'm sorry. I know that tonight I said that in a room full of people, and it may have felt like performance. I want to say it here, like this, so you have a version of it that wasn't for an audience." Nia looked at her, at the years in her face that the ballroom lighting had organized away, at the specific exhaustion of a woman who has spent a very long time making herself useful within a structure she understood was wrong, and who has finally been required to step outside it. "Did you know about my mother specifically?" Nia said. Constance was quiet for a moment. "I knew about the campaign, not the individuals targeted. I told myself there was a distinction." She stopped. "I was wrong about the distinction." "Yes," Nia said. "You were." They sat with that. "Why did you cooperate with the federal investigation?" Nia asked. Constance looked at her tea. "Because I have a granddaughter," she said. "She's 4, and she asks questions already. The way 4-year-olds ask questions about everything, about why things are the way they are. And I realized I was going to run out of answers I could live with. It was not a grand answer. It was not the answer of a woman who had arrived at ethics through principled reasoning. It was the answer of a woman who had arrived at it through the face of a 4-year-old asking questions. And Nia thought that was probably the most honest version of how most people got there. "The documentation you provided," Nia said. "Will it hold up?" "Yes," Constance said. "My attorneys have reviewed it extensively. It will hold." Nia nodded. She turned to leave. She stopped. "The families," she said, without turning back around. "From the first 2 neighborhoods, the ones who were already displaced. Is there money that can be recovered for them?" She heard Constance set the teacup down. "That's something I intend to pursue," Constance said, "as part of whatever arrangement, as part of my own reckoning with what was built in my name." A pause. "I can't promise outcomes, but I can promise that I will pursue it." Nia looked at the door in front of her, at the wood grain of it, at the light in the corridor beyond. "Your granddaughter," she said. "What's her name?" "Iris," Constance said. "Tell Iris the answers get harder when you grow up," Nia said, "but they're still worth asking." She walked out. The front of the estate was largely clear by the time she came back through. The fleet of black SUVs had reduced to 2, parked quietly on the approach. The rain had eased to something less than rain. A mist, really, the particular suspended quality of rain deciding whether to continue or stop. The cobblestones were wet and caught the light from the estate's exterior fixtures. Dante was outside. He was standing near one of the remaining vehicles, not leaning on it, just standing near it. And when she came through the front doors, he looked at her with the same patient attention he'd been watching her with all evening. She walked toward him. "I need to get to Caldwell Street," she said. "There's a car," he said, "if you want it." She looked at the car, then at him. "You're not going to tell me what happens next," she said, "are you? You're not going to make any promises about any of this." "No," he said, "because you don't know." "Because nobody knows," he said, "and I won't insult you with the version where I pretend I do." She looked at him for a long moment, at the rain on his jacket, which he had apparently been standing in long enough to accumulate, at the quality of stillness in him that she had been trying to identify all night, and that she understood now was not coldness and not detachment, but something older, the stillness of a person who has spent a very long time learning to be present without needing anything from the present moment. "The woman," she said. "Margaret Osei. Do you know where she is now?" "Atlanta," he said. "She has a small community center. She's been running it for 9 years." Nia looked at him. You stayed in touch. I found her, he said. Later. It took a while. I told her what I'd seen and what I hadn't done. He paused. She was not especially interested in my apology. She was more interested in what I could do going forward. She sounds practical. She is, he said. You'd like her. Nia looked at the mist, at the way it caught the estate's light and turned it into something softer than the night deserved. I want to be involved, she said, whatever comes next. The case, the depositions, the community proceedings. I want to be part of it. I know. I'm not asking your permission, she said. I'm telling you. I know that too, he said. She put her hands in the pockets of her uniform jacket, the jacket that still smelled faintly of champagne from the beginning of the evening, before everything, when she had been a woman doing a job in a room and had not yet learned the room was a stage that had been set for her. Why did you sit in the back? She asked. He looked at her. Tonight, at the gala. You came to that event. You sat in the back, away from everyone. Why? Because I'd heard Hargrove was planning something, he said. I didn't know what. I wanted to see the room. And then you saw the room, she said. And then I saw you, he said, standing on that platform. And I watched you decide not to break. She was quiet. Most people break, he said. Not from weakness. Because the architecture of what's done to them is specifically designed to produce breaking. It took him years to build that architecture. And you stood in it for 40 minutes and didn't give him what he built it for. I almost did, she said. Almost doesn't count, he said. I know from almost. The car was waiting. The driver was patient, or had been trained to appear patient, which in Nia's experience produced the same result. She moved toward it, stopped. Dante, she said. He looked at her. Whatever you're carrying about Margaret O'Say, about 2009, I can't tell you what to do with that. That's yours. She paused. But I don't think tonight pays it off. His expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. A very small adjustment, like a degree of angle, like something that had been held at a particular tension releasing by precisely one notch. No, he said, it doesn't. Good, she said. That means you'll keep going. She got in the car. The drive to Caldwell Street took 22 minutes through the wet, pre-dawn city. She sat in the back seat with her hands in her lap and the window down an inch because she needed the cold air, and the driver didn't comment on it. The city slid past. The particular late-night/early morning city that exists in the window between last call and first light, when the streets belong to the people who work them and no one else. She thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a kind of rest. Her mother met her at the door of the apartment before she could knock, which meant she'd been watching from the window. The same thing she'd done when Nia was 17 and had a curfew, the watching that was never surveillance but was always love expressed through vigilance. Ruth Brooks was 63 years old and had the posture of someone who had decided around age 40 that gravity was optional. She was wearing her housecoat and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at her daughter on the threshold of her apartment at 3:47 in the morning, and she put both hands on Nia's face. Just that. Both hands, warm, on either side of her face, the way she'd been doing since Nia was small enough to require looking down at. She looked at the wine stain on the uniform shirt. Come inside, she said. They sat at the kitchen table with tea that Ruth made without asking because she always made tea, and the question of whether you wanted it was never really the question. The question was how you took it. Nia told her. Not everything, not in the ordered, procedural way she'd told it to Rice. She told it the way you tell things to your mother, in the uneven, non-linear way of someone who is no longer managing their own narrative, who has finally arrived at a place where managing it isn't required. Ruth sat across from her and listened. She did not interrupt. She did not make the sounds of sympathy that fill space. The soft "oh no" and "oh baby" that Nia had heard from other people in other difficult conversations. She listened the way Nia had watched her listen at city council meetings, with the full, attentive stillness of someone who understands that listening is not a passive act. When Nia was done, Ruth put her hands around her tea and looked at the table. He had someone come to this building tonight, she said. I know. A man in a car. The large men in the hall apparently discouraged him from coming up. She paused. Gerald Hargrove sent a man to this building to scare me. Yes. Ruth looked up. Her eyes were very clear. He misunderstood the situation, she said. Yes, Nia said. He did. Ruth looked at her daughter, at the wine stain and the exhaustion and the something else, the thing that sits in a person's face after a night that has permanently changed the shape of certain things. This man, she said. Dante. Yes. He helped you. Yes. Who is he to you? Nia thought about it, about the honest answer to that question, which was that she didn't have one yet, that he was a man she had known for one night, in circumstances that were not repeatable, and that what he was to her existed only in the context of tonight, and she didn't know yet what it would look like outside of it. I don't know yet, she said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, once, with the particular nod of a woman who has been asking questions long enough to recognize when an honest answer looks like uncertainty. Okay, she said. That's a fair answer. They drank their tea. Mama, Nia said. Baby. 31 years in this apartment. 31 years, Ruth confirmed. They were going to take it. Ruth was quiet for a moment. They were going to try, she said. There's a difference. Yes, Ruth said. There is. I taught you that. Nia looked at her mother's hands around the tea, at the specific wear of them. Not damage, just use. The hands of someone who has done a great deal of work over a long time and whose hands show the record of it without apology. She thought about the foundation that Dante had mentioned in the original structure of the evening that now felt very far away, the idea of something built rather than just defended. An organization, a voice, something that didn't just resist the machinery but built different machinery in the space the old one had occupied. She didn't say it yet. It wasn't ready to be said yet. But she held it. Outside the kitchen window, the city was beginning its first adjustment toward morning. Not light yet, but the quality of darkness changing, thinning at the edges the way darkness does when something on the other side of it is getting ready. Her mother refilled her tea without asking. She accepted it. Nia, her mother said. Yeah. You didn't break. She held her cup with both hands, felt the warmth of it, thought about the marble floor and the lights and the sound of 200 people and the moment she had stepped off that platform with both feet and walked toward a door. Almost, she said. Almost doesn't count, her mother said. I know from almost. Nia looked at her. Ruth met her eyes with the expression of a woman who has been almost broken by a great many things over 63 years and is sitting at her kitchen table at 4 a.m. drinking tea, which is itself a kind of answer. Nia put her cup down. She reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's hand, and they sat like that, in the kitchen on Caldwell Street, in the apartment that was still there, while the city outside shifted incrementally toward a morning that neither of them had known. 24 hours ago, they were going to need to be this ready for. The wine stain on her uniform would come out with dish soap and cold water. She knew that. She would wash it tomorrow. Right now, she sat with her mother's hand under hers, and she did not think about the depositions or the case or the 400 families or what came next or who Dante Moretti was going to be to her outside the geography of this one impossible night. She sat with what was in front of her, which was her mother's kitchen, which was still there, which was, and the only accounting that mattered at 4 a.m. after a night like that one, more than enough.